All right. Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to another week of Crop Hour. Today is the beginning of Bug Week. I should introduce myself. My name is Patrick Wagner. I'm the entomology field specialist based in Rapid City. And as I mentioned, it's Bug Week. So this week we're going to be talking about insect IPM or integrated pest management. We're going to be mostly focusing on different research projects that we have in some of the major crop areas. So today we're going to be focusing on soybean. I guess I do want to give just kind of a quick update regarding CCA credits for today and this week. So we got those submitted a while back, but they did not get approved in time. But you can still get your CCA credits today. So our speaker is going to have a slide at the end of his presentation that's going to have basically a certificate of completion. And please just make sure to take a picture of that, and then you can self-report it on your own there. So obviously it's not as ideal as or as smooth as a QR code, but it's kind of what we have to work with for this week. Might, could change. Stuff could get updated, and we'll have QR codes tomorrow and Thursday, but we'll see. Otherwise, we'll just have these certificates. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for today on soybean. It's Phil Rozeboom. He's our IPM coordinator based in Brookings. And Phil, I'll let you go ahead and share your screen.
All right. Look good?
Looks
You can see it?
looks good. Yep, perfect. All right, and take it away. Thanks,
All right.
Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So like Pat said, I am the SDSU Extension IPM Coordinator. And then the other people who worked on a lot of these research projects were Patrick Wagner, who you just saw, and then my supervisor, Dr. Adam Varenhorst. He's the associate professor and for the most part, the entomologist for the state. So today we're going to focus on just our soybean insect research. And unfortunately, at least for soybean farmers, it seems like there are quite a few pests causing problems in soybean currently. So we're going to go through, I believe, three insects that we focus highly on research-wise, and then I'll cover four more at the end that just keep an eye out for this coming growing season. So the first one, I'm kind of cheating here. Grasshoppers, they aren't specific to soybean. They're generalists. They'll go after anything, soybean, corn, sunflower, all your different crops, your row ditches, your grass, all of it. They're general defoliators, as you can see there. And obviously, if you have enough of them, which we have had for a couple of years now, they can lead to significant forage loss. So they have been an issue in several areas from starting around 2020 all the way till, last year. And I fully suspect for them to be a problem in 2025 in this growing season. The reason they've done so well is since 2020, and that should say 24, all the way to 2024, the falls have been favorable. And I'll show a slide with that. It's because of the freeze. And then from 2021 to 23, and then some of 24, it's been dry. And for some reason, grasshoppers love when it is dry. Last year, we had a pretty wet spring. That might have decreased populations a little, but for the most part, we've had so many of them that, they emerge out of the soil in spring and they cause a lot of defoliation. So here's just an example. This is sunflower. This was taken in summer 2020, just south of Blunt, South Dakota. So on Canning Road, it's east of here by about 10, 15 miles. But if you guys have ever seen a sunflower plant, you might notice that they do not have any leaves. So in 2020, that's the first year we had some pretty severe defoliation. You might notice a soybean field to your right there. This was the first year we had sunflower in this area, and we were using the land from a producer. He sprayed his soybean for grasshoppers. We did not spray our sunflower because it was a spray trial for a different insect. And yeah, those grasshoppers went crazy. Ate every single leaf. This was a 4-acre field of sunflower, and they ate all the leaves. Here's a close-up. After they finished with the leaves, they went after the sunflower heads. And then here is a picture from 2023. This was taken in Southeast South Dakota. They went after a corn plant. I know this is a soybean presentation, but I don't have any pictures of that, but they do go after your soybean as well. So our 2025 prediction for grasshoppers, here's a drought map that we took on the 7th of January. I don't believe it has updated since then, but as you can see, it's not looking good for moisture. And unfortunately, grasshoppers really enjoy that dryness. So you can see the entire state is D1, moderate drought or higher or worse. Another factor that really helps the grasshoppers, they overwinter in the soil, and with a late frost, so date of first 28 degrees Fahrenheit freeze, um, you can see it was mainly October, mid-October to late October is when we first had that freeze. That really helps those grasshoppers because it allows them time to get into that soil to protect themselves from, the freeze killing them. Unfortunately, that has been the case since probably 2021. We've had favorable late freezes, and that really helps those grasshoppers survive during the winter. So, general threshold for grasshoppers, it's variable because when you look at a square yard, you can visualize it. Those grasshoppers aren't going to sit and wait for you to count them. They are going to leave that area. Uh, so if you have 30 to 45 nymphs or 8 to 14 adults within that square yard, you are at threshold. I always say the easiest thing to do is just remember that 30 and that 8. Because if you're at the low end of that range, that's still threshold. And then soybeans specifically, you can go off of the counts for the nymphs and adults, or you can go off the percent defoliation. And this applies to all defoliators for soybean, and I'll show more of those at the end of the presentation. But it's 30% defoliation prior to flowering, and then 20% defoliation after flowering. So I have a picture here. You might notice that it looks a lot more than it is, especially that 30%. To me, that looks way higher than 30%, but just keep that in mind. If you have soybeans that are severely defoliated like that, then you want to think about a chemical application, a insecticide. So some of the research we've done with grasshoppers is a little bit different than what we normally do. We normally look at chemical management or, other types of management. What we did with grasshoppers, and this was done in 2017 and 2018, we just did a survey looking at density and distribution of grasshoppers. So you can see a picture on your right, that's myself. We swept field ditches, 40 pendulum swings per location. Brought them back to the lab, as you can see on the picture on the left, and ID'd those grasshoppers. Let me close that here. So 2017, we had 14 locations that were above the threshold. You can see in the legend there, that was 8 or more grasshoppers per square yard. Interestingly, 2017, 2018, they had about the same amount of locations, but they differed where those locations are. So 2018, you can see that distribution of above threshold reached all the way up into northern counties of South Dakota and extended down in the southeast. And then in 2017, it was more centralized. So basically what that survey allowed us to do is just kind of see, where those grasshoppers were and their density. I know it's 2025 at this point, but we've moved on from that research, but it is something that, was interesting to see because otherwise we just kind of go off assumptions or phone calls or emails, from producers letting us know if they have a problem with grasshoppers or not. All right. So how's grasshoppers? This is our first soybean specific pest. This is a deck stem borer. It is native to North America. So historically, it's been a minor pest in soybean in South Dakota. Unfortunately, it seems like it is increasing in number and causing more severe problems, specifically in the southeast South Dakota. Um, the adults may be observed in soybean from June to August with that seasonal variability. That comes into play because with chemical management, typically, for example, soybean aphids, if they reach, the economic threshold of 250 aphids per plant, you can go out there, spray them once, and typically that will take care of your soybean aphids uh, for the most part. With Dectes, since the adults emerge for such a long period of time from June to August, chemical management, as you can see later in the presentation, really isn't viable, more or less, because they just keep on emerging over that period. Another problem is Dectes stem borer, since they are native to North America, they do have alternative hosts. Some of them being like cocklebur, wild sunflower is a good one. So if you do have Dectes stem borer, look into controlling those alternative hosts to cut down their numbers if you do have a severe infestation. So the adults, they are pretty easily identifiable. If you see one, you'll know what it is immediately. It's light gray, approximately 3/8 of an inch long. And then the key giveaway is their long antenna. Their alternating black and white coloration. Again, really easy to see if you catch one or see one in your field. The borer larva, you won't see these guys unless you pull a infested soybean plant out of the ground and crack that stem. They're cream colored or accordion shaped in the body and about half to 5/8 of an inch long. And as I mentioned, they'll be within that stem. They bore, their name, stem borer. They bore within that stem in the pith. Um, Start at the top of the plant and kind of bore down towards the root structure. So the life cycle, pupation occurs in the spring. Those adults emerge after pupation and they seek a host, and that could be alternative host, but at least for the last couple of years, it's been soybean, unfortunately. After mating, those female lay eggs near the petiole. And you can see that picture on the right, that's near that petiole, and that is a borehole caused by that larva. Those larvae hatch, they tunnel into that main stem, and then they feed on that pith, like I mentioned earlier, and towards the base of that plant. And then they overwinter in the base of their stems. And then there's one generation per year. So the economic importance, what they cause, what damage they cause, just having larvae tunneling within your soybean plant reduces your yields by 10 to 15%. Um, and that's not good, but somewhat acceptable if you do have an infestation. What can cause more problems though is 19% of infested plants approximately lodge due to normal weather. But we live in South Dakota and we have really strong winds. We can have really strong thunderstorms and whatnot. Um, you can have fields with 100% lodging, on the edge and then into the field. So you can see that picture on the bottom right there. All this lodging is caused by Dectes stem borer. Um, and just keep in mind, we have found that Dectes seem to be most severe if you plant early. And then if you have a short season variety soybean, it seems like infestations are worse because of that. The picture on the bottom left, that is what the larva does. They girdle that stem, so you can see that small little piece of stem that's sticking out from that soybean stem. What that is that Dectes goes to that root structure, girdles almost all the way around, but leaves a little bit. That's because it wants that soybean to lodge over the winter, and then they emerge out of that stem that's in the soil. Of course, we harvest soybean. It's not natural per se, harvesting that soybean, so that throws them off a little bit. But naturally, that's why they girdle that, so it lodges and they can emerge in spring. So, kind of a history on it. Field infestations have been increasing since 2017. That's when we really started getting reports on decties within soybean. And since about 2022, we have had 80% plus infestations of soybean fields. Two of the counties that seem to be hit the hardest is Yankton and Bon Homme County. That's where we see the majority of heavy infestations. But that is increasing. So we do a survey of Decty stem borer, and I'll show that here in a bit. But here's what it looks like. This is a picture or 3 pictures I took in 2022, just west of Yankton, about 10 miles west of Yankton. As you can see here, we cracked those stems open, and you can see that that borer went through the pith of that soybean plant down toward the stem. So if you're scouting for these guys, this is what that looks like. So management recommendations historically, and from what we found, and I'll show that, do not use foliar insecticides with that extended emergence period of those adults from June to August. It's just difficult to apply a treatment at the right time to kill those adults before they lay eggs. And then those foliar insecticides, since those larvae are deep within that stem and literally towards the base of it, those foliar insecticides aren't going to reach that larva within that soybean plant. Um, with uh, if you do have decties, tillage is a viable management practice to control them. The reason for that is because they are within that stem at the soil level, and if you do tillage, that can disturb those larvae, kill those larvae within those stems. That's not great for your soil health, and I know a lot of people are going away from tillage, but if you do have severe infestations of decties, it is something you should consider. At the very least, we have mentioned to producers with infestations, just till the edge of your field, like the first 100 feet or so, just to cut back on decties infestations. And then also management of those weedy hosts, those alternative hosts like cocklebur, wild sunflower. And then of course crop rotation. You can do that as well. That comes with a caveat though, because we're pretty good with crop rotations already, and it seems like the numbers are increasing despite that. And then early harvest. So I did mention that 19% with normal weather lodges. Well, if you harvest early, you can avoid that lodging. Plus, you might disrupt some of those larvae from reaching the base of that soybean plant. You disrupt their life cycle by harvesting early. So as I mentioned, crop rotations already exist. It doesn't seem to really have an effect on them. Fields are being transitioned to no-till. So that does help decty stem borer when you don't till your soil. Weedy hosts are managed in most fields, so that doesn't seem to be, the cause of their increase. How do we manage this pest? So we're getting into the research part of it. There was 2 main objectives when we started looking at decties in 2022 or 23 it was. We wanted to find, just like with the grasshoppers, where they were mostly concentrated within eastern South Dakota. So what we did is we went out and sampled soybean fields in the east central to Nebraska border from June to July for presence of those decties stem borer adults. You can see a picture there in the bottom right. That was myself. I was sampling that soybean field with that sweep net. And then we threw it into a Ziploc bag, brought it back to the lab, and we counted number of adults per sample site. So here is a map. It includes both 2023 and 2024. 23 is the diamonds and 24 is the circles. You can see in 2023 we sampled the entire eastern half of South Dakota. For the most part, the highest number we found was 3. The reason for that is we think we sampled a little too early. We sampled fields before those adults were really out in full force. We kind of learned from that in 2024. We sampled later, kind of in July, August time. And as you can see, we had pretty significant adult counts. A couple dark red dots there, that's 20 to 43 adults just in one sample of a field. And you might notice that concentration-wise, it is in the southeast part of South Dakota, is where they are mostly concentrated. So objective two, we did a foliar insecticide spray trial, small plot spray trial, and we included fipronil seed treatment um, to see if any of these worked to control deck stem borer. Historically, they have not. Foliar insecticides have not, but we figured we might as well start somewhere. So we took chemicals that were labeled for deck management. In 2023, we did all of them, as you can see. Mustang Max, Entrust, Warrior 2, Asana XL, they are not labeled for deck stem borer, but we threw them in 2023 anyway. They did not provide any control whatsoever in 2023. So in 2024, we altered what we did, removed those unlabeled ones and focused just on Elevis, Brigade, Hero, and Vanticore. And then we also included that fipronil, which is seed treatment in 2024. There were 6 treatments with 8 blocks, as I just showed you. We had 2 different spray dates, so we were trying to see if a spray date made a difference since those adults merged for such a long time. We sprayed on July 8th and July 25th, and then we had plots that were sprayed both July 8th and July 25th. We used our little bean buggy as seen there. Bradley McManus, he's our IPM specialist. He fabricated that, put a 9-boom sprayer on the back of it, and we use that to apply our treatments. So we monitored those plots throughout from early June till the end of August to try to see if we could get the peak emergence of those deck stem borer. And of course, that was July 8th and July 25th is kind of when we saw those peaks. We then went out later on in the season and sampled 20 stems per plot at each location. And we monitored those stems or evaluated them later in the lab to see if there was a larva in them. And then, of course, we collected yield as well. So here's our late yield results. This is at Tabor, South Dakota, so only about 2 miles north of the Nebraska border. And unfortunately, we saw this in 2023 as well, but there was no significant difference between any of the treatments and the untreated. It didn't matter if you sprayed early, if you sprayed late, or if you sprayed twice. It didn't matter. There was no significant difference. Same thing. We did the exact same trial at near Menno, South Dakota, and we didn't have the fipronil seed treatment there, but exact same thing. The foliar treatments did not work, and that's something we kind of already knew, but we wanted to make sure, and we confirmed it. Their foliar treatments do not appear to work on your deck stem borer. Stem results at Tabor, you can see no significant difference. Those foliar treatments really had no effect on your larva as we presumed it would. Same thing at Menno, no statistical difference between all those different foliar treatments. So summary, as I just said, there were no differences among them. One thing we did notice, stem infestations were down 50% at both locations in 24 compared to 23. We're not entirely sure why that is. Maybe it's because of the wet spring we had in 24 affected those larvae down in the stem. It was too wet for them. One thing to keep in mind though, so at least for science, if it's not statistically significant, it means it isn't different. But at least for a farmer, when it comes to yield, I'll go to this one here. Vanticore, that combo spray, did have a numerically higher yield result. And at least for a producer, that might be a difference. 10 bushels per acre is pretty significant for you. So in summary, that deck stem borer, we have seen increasing populations to grow in southeast South Dakota, and they seem to be extending northward. We'll see, if we do another survey this year, if that trend continues. Foliar insecticides may reduce the impact of deck stem borer, but it all comes down to if you apply when those adults are at peak emergence, and with such a long emergence time, that's nearly impossible. So what can you do if you do have decties? Well, harvest your soybeans early to avoid that lodging and cut short decties development. And then I mentioned it earlier, you might want to think about doing some light tillage just to disrupt those larvae in the stems. All right, so the next one is soybean gall midge. If you guys have seen some presentations the past couple of years, you would have seen a lot of these slides already. But with soybean gall midge, here's a picture of them. They're a small, very small, bright orange larva that kind of lives underneath the skin of a soybean plant. You can see that on the picture on the right there. Just for reference, there are 3 larval instars, so that's growth stages for the most part. That first instar, if you're scouting for gall midge, you're never going to see it. They are so tiny. Second instar, they're a little bigger, starting to turn orange. And then that third instar is their last growth stage. That's when they're the largest, and that's when they're bright fire red orange. Very easy to see. The adults, this picture was taken in Nebraska. They're about a quarter of an inch long from leg tip to leg tip. They have orange abdomens and white and black banded legs and 1 pair of wings. This is just for reference. We've only ever caught 1 adult gall midge, so you will probably never see these. Just focus primarily on the larva. Why should we care? This is a yield map taken in 2019. That's when gall midge seemed to hit the southeast South Dakota really hard. It reduced yields on the field edges to 10 to 100%. So in some cases, wiped out the entire edge of the field, resulting in entire field averages, yield averages dropping 10 to 50% in total. So the problem, before 2011, there were no reports of this pest in the Midwest. Nebraska first kind of came upon them in 2011, and then in South Dakota is when we first got our hints of gall midge causing issues. It was in 2015. Just like the grasshoppers that I covered and the Dectes stem borer, the larvae overwinter in the soil of an infested field, and then they emerge in the spring, just like Dectes and grasshopper. They are brand new species, only reported in the Midwest. You can see the scientific name there. We had to bring a midge expert. He was retired. We had to bring him out of retirement just to ID this insect, and it is a brand new species. And as I mentioned, they emerge in the spring, and we're not entirely sure, what triggers it. A lot of insects, it's based on growing degree days, so that's a combination of sunlight and heat. It's very possible that's what it is, but again, we're not entirely sure since it's a brand new species. We haven't proven that yet. So here's what an infestation looks like. I believe this picture was taken in Nebraska in 2020 or 2019, one of the two. You can see the cornfield on the left and then that soybean on the right. All of that dampening off, that dying, wilting soybean there, that is caused by gall midge. And that is an example of a severe infestation. Here's some closer up pictures of soybean gall midge. Again, this was taken in Nebraska. Since Nebraska had them first, they're a little bit ahead of us in South Dakota on their research progress. But this is what it looks like. Keep in mind, gall midge always seem to start on the edge of your field, as seen here. They always start on the edge. We think the reason is since they're such a small adult that they can't really fly that far, so they'll emerge out of last year's soybean, which is corn in this example, and then they fly into, this year's soybean. So they always start at the edge and work their way into the field as they get worse. So what it looks like early season, that plant right in the middle there, that is soybean gall midge. They basically cut off the flow of nutrients and fluids from the root structure up into the plant, making it dry out and die. You can see the corn at the very top there. Obviously, that was last year's soybean crop. So when you're looking for soybean, first off is to look for those dead wilting plants on the edge of your field. There are many diseases that can cause this as well, so that's why it's important to go out into your field, pull up your soybean plant, look for those discolored stems, those dead wilting plants, and then things to look where to look for is previously infested soybean fields, obviously, because that's where they're going to come from, near groves or shelter belts, and then early planted soybean seems to be susceptible to soybean gall midge. So in the southeast, if you have Dectes and gall midge, You want to plant early to avoid deck days, but then also you might be getting soybean gallmage because of that. So it's kind of tough to manage both. But when you're looking for soybean gallmage damage, when you walk out into that field that has some wilting, one of the dead giveaways is that gallmage makes that stem extremely brittle. So I'm sure you are aware soybean stems are usually pretty, at this point, this is a later maturity soybean plant. Stems are pretty strong, not easily to crack, tip over, lodge, but that gallmage makes that stem so brittle that it'll crack quite easily, just like a dry twig. So the soybean plant here, that discoloration there right by the root structure, that's caused by that soybean gallmage, and then it was extremely easy to crack that stem. And so that discoloration there, if you peel that back, here's an example of a severe infestation. This was taken in 2019. You can see that brown discoloration on the stem. The root structure is to the top right of that picture. And obviously you can see all those bright fire red orange gallmage. And again, this is a severe infestation, extreme example of that type of infestation. So what have we been doing with soybean gallmage? What is our research focused on? Well, the first thing, just like with all insects, you want to kind of figure out when they emerge in their life cycle, because based off of that life cycle, you can make management decisions or try to come up with management decisions. So what we've been doing is we put basically modified corn rootworm emergence cages. You can see in the top right there what that looks like. We place them on last year's bean stubble, and then we check them weekly for gallmage adults. So you can see a picture of that mason jar with gallmage adults in there. So most of this has come from Nebraska. Justin McMecken, his name's right in the middle there underneath the word road. He's kind of worked primarily on this insect and has been trying to figure out its biology, ecology. So here's just an example. You have your cornfield, which was last year's soybean. You can see the cocoon of the midge overwintering in that soil. They pupate, emerge as adults, and fly over to the soybean. So just for your reference, this monitoring where these emergence cages, we do have a website dedicated to when we first find adults. So if you go to soybeangallmage.org, you will be able to see kind of, if you're curious, when gall midges are emerging and whether you should think about, trying to manage them. So what we found with gall midge, primarily this research was done in 2019, 2020, 2021. They emerged first in June 14th, then June 10th, and then 2021, they emerged quite a bit later, May 31st. Again, it's so new, we're not sure what causes them to emerge. Could possibly be growing degree days, but we're not sure. And then just like the Decti stem borer, management of the adults doesn't seem practical with the foliar insecticide. The reason being is because they do also, gallmage, have a long emergence time. So in 2019, it was 19 days, 2020 is 35 days, and 2021 it was 44 days that those adults emerged. So again, just like with Dectis, foliar management of the adults doesn't seem practical. So South Dakota confirmations, we go out and scout random soybean fields in eastern South Dakota, just like the Decties and just like the grasshoppers. So far, we've had 32 counties with infestations of gall midge. Infestations are always worse in the southern counties. And infestations range from obvious plant death, which we had a lot of in 2019. That's when you could drive past a soybean field and you could see the dead wilting plants, to asymptomatic soybean. And what that means is the plant is infested with soybean gall midge, but it looks perfectly healthy unless you pull it up out of the soil and look for those gall midge. You wouldn't know that they were there. So here's just a legend. We've been doing this survey since about 2018. You can see those are the red counties there. 2019 is orange, 2020 yellow, 2021 is green, and then 2022 is blue. We have sampled for gall midge in 2023 and 24. We just didn't find any in any of the gray counties there. The one caveat of this map to keep in mind is so like Sanborn there, it's blue. I sampled that county. It took me about 5 hours, and I eventually found one soybean plant with one soybean gall midge larva in it, and that is confirmation that it is in that county. If you go to Clay County, Clay, Union, Lincoln, those seem to be the most heavily infested every year. You can spend 5 minutes, go out to a soybean field, pull it up, and you're going to find a plant with, one or more, typically more gall midge within it. So the map is a little deceiving. Yes, it's confirmed, in the northern counties, but infestations are drastically less than in your southeast counties. So what do you know so far? Treatments have variable effect. The foliar treatments, they don't really seem to do anything. Ridge tillage and cultivation reduces infestations. Late planted soybeans seem to be less infested. We think it's because the stems aren't quite big enough when the adults first emerge to facilitate gall midge within the stem. And then it seems like drought reduces infestation. So I mentioned 2019 was really wet and we had pretty severe infestations. But ever since then, it's been pretty dry the past couple years. And for the most part, it doesn't seem like gall midge is causing nearly the issues it did in 2019. So here's an example of ridge tillage and hilling. So this was done in Nebraska again by Justin McMecken. And as you can see in this graph here, hilling or ridge tillage was significantly dropped those gall midge infestations significantly compared to not doing it. And basically you can see these pictures here. What you do is you try to cover the base of that soybean plant with soil. And it seemed to work quite well. The only caveat is with drought, you really don't want to do tillage. You want to preserve that moisture within your soil. And then doing this takes a very long time. I think Justin had to go about 3 miles an hour in order not to damage the soybean plant. So if you do want to do something like this, try to do it on the edge of your soybean field, just like if you just do normal conventional tillage. Start on the edge of your soybean field instead of trying to do your entire field if you don't want to do your entire field. Another thing Justin found was using granular T-band drop nozzle. It again, just like with the tillage, had a significant effect on gall midge within the soybean plant. You can see that little blurry picture in the upper right there. Basically what that was, instead of applying the treatment like we typically do at the top of the canopy, that nozzle dropped down and sprayed directly at the base of that soybean plant. And you can see he used leverage 360 with that drop nozzle. It significantly reduced the total larval count. You can see the untreated is the blue bar, and then the overhead, our standard application, they were not different. They were 40 larvae per plant. And then that drop nozzle dropped it all the way down to about 19 larvae per plant. So that's soybean gall midge. Just keep an eye out for them. Again, always look at the edge of your field for drying or wilting plants. One thing to keep in mind is we do have another species, the white mold gall midge. They will always accompany white mold, but they do look very similar to soybean gall midge. This picture is taken by Bruce Potter, based out of Minnesota. Um, so just keep in mind, if you have white mold and you think you might have gall midge, it's possible that you don't. You have white mold gall midge instead. All right, so this is our last insect of that we've directly researched. I'm sure you guys are very aware of this. The soybean aphids, they're small green pear-shaped insect, winged or wingless stages, and then they're found on the leaves and stem. As you can see here, they're all over the stem of this R1 soybean plant. I will mention when you are scouting for soybean aphids, always start at the top of the soybean plant, the top of the canopy. They suck phloem right out of the soybean plant, and the most nutrients are always focused at that new growth. So when you are scouting for soybean aphids, just start at the top where that new growth is, and that's where you're probably going to find them most often. So soybean aphid management since 2000, they are a invasive species. They're not native to, North America, South Dakota. But since 2000, when they first started showing up and causing issues in soybean, they have been primarily managed with foliar insecticides. And, a lot of insects are primarily managed with foliar insecticides. Of those, due to economics, price, pyrethroids specifically were used the most. Lambda cyhalothrin, I believe, is Warrior 2. Um, and then with soybean aphids, their populations in the early or late 2000s, early 2000s would explode, thousands per plant. Multiple applications were required to control them, and the applications at that time always worked. However, in 2012, we started seeing some warning signs. So keep in mind when you go out and spray insect pest, you're not just treating that one insect, not just soybean aphids, you're applying that treatment to every insect in your field. Well, in 2012, we started seeing two-spotted spider mites that were resistant to pyrethroids, and that was kind of our warning indication for what was to come with soybean aphids. So in 2015, we started getting our first reports in Minnesota of pyrethroid applications, soybean aphid surviving pyrethroid applications, and you can see the counties in red there. Reapplication of pyrethroids, which typically worked before, had no effect. It did not kill those aphids. Minnesota collected those aphids, brought them back to the lab, did the necessary tests, and confirmed that they were resistant to pyrethroid insecticides. In 2016, Minnesota and Iowa had more reports. You can see just one county in Iowa. North Dakota, South Dakota, we didn't have any reports of failures. In 2017, that's the first year that we had resistance in South Dakota. You can see Iowa didn't, Minnesota and North Dakota both did. This year was a little strange in that there was a pretty severe outbreak of soybean aphid in North Dakota and Minnesota. For the most part, soybean aphids seem to be at equilibrium in the ecosystem, so they're still out there, but they don't seem to reach numbers like they did when they were first introduced in the early 2000s. But you can see here in South Dakota, the three counties in South Dakota, those are our three research farms. Our Northeast Research Farm near South Shore, our Volga Research Farm near Volga, South Dakota, near Brookings, and then our one in Clay County there, our Southeast Research Farm. And what that was is our grad student went out, did a very small field trial to see if the soybean aphids were resistant, and they were. So in 2018, that same grad student went out and sampled more. He basically did a survey. He sampled soybean aphids from all these different counties here. Orange was confirmed in 2017, 2018. The red counties were added. Keep in mind that just because counties weren't sampled, the white ones, doesn't mean there aren't resistance populations there. It was just more of a factor of what the grad student had time, to do. Very labor intensive to do the testing. But the red orange counties were resistant. Fortunately, that green county there, I can't recall what it is off the top of my head, but we do still have susceptible populations of soybean aphids. And that's important because with insect resistance, as long as you have a susceptible population, there is still hope of control. Unfortunately, it's just one out of all of those. So scouting recommendations when you're going out and looking for soybean aphids, scout 20 plants at 4 to 5 locations in the field. Evaluate them for aphids. Basically, you start, like I mentioned earlier, at the new growth of that soybean plant and work your way down. Typically, if your infestations aren't too heavy, you won't find any more aphids really past that top part of the canopy. Count them, and if 80% of those plants that you counted have 250 aphids or more, that's when you want to think about a foliar application. So that 250, that is the economic threshold. That was developed, in the early 2000s. If you reach that number, that's when you want to think about chemical management. And then here's a speed scouting worksheet. So this will help you scout faster if you're looking for soybean aphids. This sheet is available if you go to soybeanaphid.info. You can download this and bring it with you, print it, whatever you need to do, bring it out to the field. And that will, as you can see here, do not treat, continue sampling, treat, confirm again in 3 to 4 days. This is just a helpful worksheet for anyone scouting for soybean aphids. So management recommendations for aphids at this time. Again, consider something besides pyrethroid active ingredient. Reason, we found resistance to that. Avoid prophylactic applications. What that means is applying treatment before you reach that threshold. So if you only have 10 aphids per plant, you are not incurring, a yield loss, economic loss. And if you applied treatment, you're just wasting dollars at that point. Plus, applying too early, that prophylactic application, that does help soybean aphids develop, resistance. So another thing is don't use the same insecticide class twice. So as I mentioned earlier, you would spray a pyrethroid in the early 2000s, you knock back the aphids would come back, you spray again with a pyrethroid again, and of course it would knock them back, and that seemed to work for the most part. But now, basically doing that is what made them resistant to pyrethroids. So if you do have to treat soybean aphids, try to use different classes, something other than pyrethroid. All right. So that was those 3 insects were pretty much the only ones we really researched in depth. But I wanted to mention here at the end of the presentation, just ones to keep an eye out for this coming season. The first one is your red-headed flea beetles. They have been pretty severe in the southeast part of South Dakota. At our southeast research farm near Beersford, they're pretty prevalent and they cause, pretty severe defoliation in our soybean. Here's a picture of one. They have a dark red head with a black body. And then you can kind of see its hind legs there at the end. They're kind of like a grasshopper. They're very springy. And when you walk through a soybean field, you'll know you have them because they'll be hopping all over the place. And then here's a example of what they do on their leaves. So if you see damage like this, it's very possible that is the red-headed flea beetle. Another one is bean leaf beetles. Here's a picture of their kind of color variation, and, dark red, yellow, and then kind of a tan color. But they always have those 4 black spots on their back, along with a black triangle pointing towards the end of the body. And these guys, these are more early season pests, and unfortunately, it's focused more in the southeast. Again, seems like southeast South Dakota has all the problems when it comes to soybean pests. But here's pictures of bean leaf beetle damage on soybean. Again, they kind of hit your soybean more early on in the season, as you can see here. Our grad student who did the soybean aphid research, one of his fields at the Southeast Research Farm was completely defoliated by bean leaf beetle, caught us off guard. That was the last year that happened. That was in 2018, but that's why it's important to go out and scout your field because they can explode in numbers just randomly, it seems. So keep an eye out for defoliation like this. Another one is Japanese beetles. This was taken August 26th in 2023. We were actually sampling for Decti stem borer when we came across this. Again, unfortunately, this was in the southeast again. This was in Clay County, just north of Vermilion. You can see the Japanese beetle there, 3 of them on that soybean leaf. And then a picture on the bottom right, you can see that defoliation got pretty severe in some spots where leaves were completely removed. Another one is your green cloverworm. 3 pairs of true legs, 3 pairs of pro legs. You can see the picture of those legs on the bottom left there. They migrate from the southern US, so they're more of an issue later on in the season. But all these insects, your red-headed flea beetles, your bean leaf beetles, your Japanese beetles, and your green cloverworm, they all fall under with that general defoliating insect threshold, just like the grasshoppers. So if you have a 30% defoliation prior to flowering, that's when you want to think about, chemical management. And again, this applies to all those insects combined for that threshold. And then 20% defoliation after flowering. And keep in mind, it looks a lot worse than it is. That 30%, at least to me, looks like a lot more than 30%. So with that, I believe Candy will be putting up a survey for you. Um, this presentation primarily focused on what our research was, and then kind of insects to keep an eye out for. But hopefully she'll get that survey up. We want to know what you guys are seeing primarily as an insect pest. Do you have soybean gall midge? Have you seen Japanese beetle? Let us know in that survey here. So here's some required slides we have here. Here's my contact information. There's my office phone number. If you want to get a hold of me, though, primarily send me an email. Reason being, I'm rarely in my office, especially in the summertime. We're out in the field, driving all over South Dakota. So if you want to get a hold of me, please just send me email if you have any questions. All right. It looks like most of you, thank you for answering that survey question. It looks like grasshoppers are pretty heavy issue here. So I'm glad I covered that. I wasn't sure if I was going to or not. So soybean aphids looks like bean leaf beetles. That's pretty surprising, 58%. Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
I
Well,
think the bean leaf beetles definitely that's one to watch for. Um, on those, I think the cold winters certainly help with that. So like our polar vortex that we just had that was sub-zero temperatures, that should hopefully help with, killing off some of those overwintering insects, especially those bean leaf beetles. It was pretty mild last winter. Um, and actually I was up in Perkins County this spring and even clear up there, I was in a field that was planted to soybean the year previously, and there were just tons of bean leaf beetles coming out of the kind of the windbreak close by there. So I was kind of surprised to see them that far north last year. So there's definitely that population was there last year. Hopefully we don't see a huge boom in them again this
mhm.
coming spring.
Yep. And that's the thing, at least with insects and I guess your weeds, diseases as well. Very important to go out and get out in your field just to see what's there and try to do that weekly because, like Pat mentioned, and with those bean leaf beetles, it did catch us off guard in 2018. We did lose a couple acres of soybean to them, and that was very early on in the season. Um, and grasshoppers, I'll mention grasshoppers can do the exact same thing, and it looks like a lot of you had grasshopper issues this past year. So, all right. Is
Yeah.
there any questions, Pat?
Yes. So, of course, I forgot to mention that at the beginning. If you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. But it looks like we do have a couple that have come through. Um, so the first one I'll address is it's from Paul here in the chat, and he's asking, what insecticide did you use with the drop nozzles? And it looks like he's referring to soybean gall midge, and I think that was the research that Justin McMecken was doing at UNL.
Yep. He used, at that time, it was leverage 360. So, uh, that's the only one he used. Typically, we like to use more than one chemical, kind of like how we did with the Decty stem borer. But at that time, Justin only used leverage 360, and it seemed to have worked, on Gallmage. Doesn't mean other chemical classes, other products won't work. I suspect they should, just like leverage did.
Okay, we have a couple more in the Q&A. So Aiden's asking, I know that Dectes larva stays in the stem, but is there any signs or conditions to know that you have the larva, or do you have to wait for them to become adults?
So signs of Dectes, the plants for the most part are asymptomatic. So if you're driving on your gravel road looking at your soybean field, you won't know that you have a Dectes infestation. The first sign you'll see that you have that, it will be lodging. So if you start seeing plants, lodging out in your field, that's a It could be other things, but it is a good indication that you have decties in your soybean. With decties though, unlike the soybean gall midge, you won't have that wilting like you do with soybean gall midge. The plants will look, like I said, perfectly fine from the road. So the best thing, at least how we scouted for decties larvae, is we went out into a field that we suspected with infestation, and you just pull those plants up, crack them open, and if you know you have that pith, that hollowing out, very good chance that that's your Dectes presence, that Dectes larva.
Okay, and then looks like Derek has a good question here. What insect has the highest pressure during drought seasons? I off the top of my head, I can think of two. Um, Certainly grasshoppers is one,
Mm-hmm.
and soybean aphids. I mean, if we're talking about soybeans, any aphid really does well when the plants are stressed. Their populations just explode.
Yep.
I don't know, Phil, are there any others that you could think of that would be high on that list?
Um, One I very briefly mentioned with soybean aphid was this two-spotted spider mite.
Yes, that's another
Historically,
good one. Yep.
yep, they've always done really well in a drought year. I don't know if we've had reports of pretty severe outbreaks in South Dakota these past couple years, which is surprising because like, they should be doing quite well. Because just like with soybean aphid, you know, they like a nice stressed plant. They'll go after that. So,
Yeah, even yeah, with spider mites, that's a big thing that if it's dry, they it's just really good for their populations. I don't know if they have isn't there like a predatory mite that does well in more humid conditions or something, so they maybe
yeah,
don't
yep,
have that.
knocks them back. Yep.
Yeah, they don't have the that natural enemy keeping them in check, so they just kind of go nuts. Okay,
All
well,
right.
it doesn't look like there's any more questions in the Q&A. Candy, thank you for putting up that next poll here. If you guys want to take some time to fill that one out, just kind of more of a general poll here on crop hour. Otherwise, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today. So tomorrow you're going to get to hear from me. I'll be talking about sunflower and alfalfa. Lots to cover there. And then on Thursday, we'll hear from Dr. Adam Varenhorst. He's going to be covering corn and some of our research that we have going on there. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks again, Phil, for your presentation today. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thank you.